in fantasy football history, hosted by the incomparable Scott Connor and the one and only Ray GQ. I present to you Destination Chill, where football and fantasy collide.
GEGP, welcome back, good people. It is Sunday, July 14th. Scott, Connor, we are more than halfway through the 2024 calendar year, and we are mere days away from the start of the NFL season, baby. Training camp is right around the corner. We will finally get back to real football. The practices that matter, all the big dogs are back. It is go time as we gear up for the start of the 2024 NFL season. And for us in the fantasy space, the start of the 2024 fantasy football season tonight. Scott, we are going to talk all things football and some of the things that we are curious about and some of the things we'll be paying attention to going into training camp that may shape the way we play this season, beyond some different things that are happening around the league and around the fantasy football space. Scott, before we get into it, how are you, my friend?
Very well. We took a week off for a little vacation last week, and it's going to be the last Destination Chill for 2 more weeks. So yeah, kind of on a every other week schedule. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Training camps just kicked off. A couple teams had some players report this weekend. Majority are going to be this week. So I am looking forward to things changing. I think that's the biggest thing. When we were talking about doing this show, there's going to be a lot that changes. Now, how concrete some of that is, how actually valid the information is in terms of actionable things we can do in our leagues is a different story. But information is going to start rolling out daily, hourly, by the minute here soon. And it's going to change. It's going to change what people do. So that's what we're here to talk about tonight. I'm looking forward to it, my friend.
Yeah, I just left our Scott Fishbowl event down in downtown Dallas. Shout out to Community Brewing. Shout out to everybody that was at the live Dallas event. Shout out to Scott Fish. And I had a chance to catch up with Josh Larkey. Scott, you know Josh Larkey, does work at Player Profiler, formerly of 33rd Team. Josh and I actually had a podcast together when we were doing work with FTN and just sort of chopping it up with him and D-Bro about the game. And, Larkey was asking me what was going on, what DD had cooking, what are some of the top 3 things that I'm thinking about for the company and the direction of the space in the game. And it really sort of sparked the topic for tonight's conversation, Scott, because we were chatting about fantasy football and what people want, what the consumer wants. What are people looking for when we are disseminating content, when we are telling people who to pick, who's going to be a breakout player this season, who's going to fail this year, who we're putting our chips on and our bets on. And there have been a lot of conversations that I've seen over the past couple of weeks, particularly around the wide receiver position. There's an awesome show on Netflix right now called Receiver. Ran into Malik Nabers at the airport last week. Scott got to see Malik Nabers, chopped it up with him for about 10 minutes in the airport. But a lot of talk around these situations and around, and the conversation isn't around, Scott, the top dogs. It seems like everyone's caught up, whether you call it warp, elite players, game-breaking players, difference makers. People have caught up to the fact that no one needs to listen to a podcast or watch a video with somebody talking about Christian McCaffrey and how good he's going to be, or Lamar Jackson, or Travis Kelce, Sam Laporta. And no one gives a shit about that because everybody knows. People know, yeah, those are your elite players. Those are your number 1 targets, A.J. Brown, et cetera, et cetera. As you think about what people are really searching for is information on the range of players that we have on this show talked about. They're all kind of the same, that a lot of people talk about. Well, they're all just trade them. Who cares about T. Higgins or Zay Flowers or this player? They're all just cluttered together. They don't matter, or they're all the same. Yet I'm listening to people talk about what they want more. People don't just want they're all the same, or this player's just going to get that. So let's just focus. People are thirsting for, talk me through why I should be in this situation or out, or why I should press this draft button, trade, accept, whatever the case may be. So talking about, just how we're approaching the game outside of the elite players, Scott? What are you most curious about playing out this season? What are you looking for an outcome or a potential thing that may change the way we view or play Dynasty as we move forward into this training camp season?
A lot to unpack. I'll answer your question directly, but I wanted just to say this, that you and I as content creators, we're always looking for ways to mix together analysis for what is going to get the most traction and apply to the broadest listener base out there, right? Like, we're not trying to create content. I'm not trying to make content to appeal to the Ray Garvins of the world, the person that has 400 leagues, right? That is doing everything to the sun in terms of participating in this, participating in that. And that's where I think it becomes interesting because, I'm looking right now, I'm about 270 underdog drafts in, right? I'm in another 45 dynasty leagues. I'm going to do another 40 high stakes redraft leagues. So for me, I'm looking at this purely from a numbers perspective. When somebody asks me, all right, tell me about that receiver range from 10 to 40 and which ones you're convicted on and which ones you're not. From what I'm actually doing, Ray, guess what I'm probably doing? I'm never not having 5 to 10% of all of them. Now, some I'm going to have more, and some I'm going to go down to probably the lowest possible percentage based on the cost. But when I make statements like they don't matter, they're all the same, that's also coming at it from a lens of largely they're all in a place where the range of outcomes are pretty much defined, but there's going to be players in those ranges that emerge. There's going to be players that burn you and you go, that guy could have never become a top 8 player at his position. And then lo and behold, the dude has a wide receiver 6 season. And you're going, you were wrong, And then there's going to be others that you draft in that range. Oh, man, that guy's guaranteed to give me a 20% target share and finish as a top 30 receiver. And then you look up and you go, yeah, man, there's another guy in his offense that's getting more of that pie than you thought. Christian Watson. What if he's the 4th best receiver on his team? Like, he's not no wide receiver 30. He might be wide receiver 50. And you're going, what was that a mistake in the process? So I think it's understanding first and foremost that there are flat tiers, the tiers above the elite players at every position that are going to have variance. And because we are playing in so many leagues and so many drafts that you may hear me when you're in voice chat, may hear me say they're all the same. I'm treating them all the same. I don't really care which one I have. I want to make smart decisions within those tiers, but I'm not going to expose myself too much or too little on any players in there. So I think that we have to preface it by that is going to be included in a lot of the content that we do. But then back to your original question. I think the edge is twofold. And let me ask you this. When you were thinking about that topic, were you thinking just for this upcoming season, or were you also thinking some dynasty psychology in there, some ADV, some what are people going to think if the average outcome happens? Because there are players that I can tell you I would make a bet today that it's going to be an average outcome, but I would also make a bet that is a upward moving asset because there is too much ADV and support for the player, and it's almost like they're going to get credit for the built-in excuse before it actually happens. So like Malik Nabers is a perfect one. You already mentioned Malik Nabers. Hopefully you had a good conversation with him at the airport. I've run through all the numbers on Malik Nabers. It's very hard for me to look at him and go, man, I think he could be a top 12 receiver, top 15 receiver, right? Like, just, it doesn't add up. There's too many question marks to where there's probably 3 or 4 question marks with him that do not exist with the other players that are going in the same range as him. But if I also told you if Malik Nabers is just the best player on his team, but his team sucks, his quarterback sucks, his offense sucks, and all of those things are negative, is the dynasty community going to care, Ray?
No.
If he's wide receiver 24, but he's the only thing the Giants have, will people care? Or will it just be they're waiting for him to get his new offensive coordinator, his new coach, and his new quarterback, and as soon as he does, he's wide receiver 7. So like in that sense, you have to build that into the analysis that you would not build in for a player like Devonte Smith. He is where he is. It's probably not changing for years. In fact, it's probably not changing for the prime of his dynasty life. So even though those players are the exact same tier, you have to view them totally differently. So we can't lose that context. If we're talking underdog, give me Devonte Smith over Malik Nabers. But in terms of which one has ADV, which one has excuses built in to where they're almost bulletproof, it's the other way around. So I think it's important to really give the context first. What lens are we talking here? We talking short term? We talking underdog? We talking about
what
dynasty?
Are people talking? What are people talk? What is the lens? Because what happens is you just get on whatever outlet you use, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, whatever it is, YouTube, sell Malik Nabers, buy Devonte Smith, trade for Anthony. There's never any fucking context to what you should actually be doing with the asset, yet those sentiments carry massive weight, and you're talking about this difference between Devonte Smith and Nabers, like to me, and it seems so common sense that targets from Daniel Jones, I don't care how many he's getting, there is a difference between being targeted by Brock Purdy or targeted by Daniel Jones. There is a difference. There's a difference between receiving targets from Joe Burrow and Anthony Richardson. Yet, right now on Underdog, they're literally back-to-back, Devonte Smith and Malik Nabers. So my question to you with this is, and the follow-up to that is, we're talking in the voice chat, and I think it was a great conversation. The two players that were referenced were Garrett Wilson and Drake London. And the conversation stemmed around one of those players both of those players carrying risk going into the season. And the conversation was not risk from a fact that they're going to be the number one target earner on their team. I don't think anybody is thinking there's anybody else on Atlanta or the Jets that are going to out-target Garrett Wilson or Drake London. But if the outcome at the end of the season is not where people believe they should be for London or Wilson, the other dynasty manager was saying, like, this is a year 3 receiver who will have underperformed for 3 straight years, give or take, however you want to, whatever your expectation level was, they did not surpass that for 3 straight years. And we believe that that value for said player is going to decrease if they don't perform this year. So I think, like you say, Scott, the foundation and context of how you're discussing the type of player, right? I tell you Garrett Wilson is risky this year. You might sit back and go, what the hell are you talking about risky? He's going to walk into 150 targets minimum. But what if Aaron Rodgers isn't that good and Garrett Wilson only puts up 1,100 yards? Say that's the outcome. Drake London only goes for 1,100 yards and 4 touchdowns, 5 touchdowns. If that happens, how does your asset mature in the future? And I think that's where people want more, Scott. I think we're starting to get to a period, and I was a spot in fantasy, and I was having this conversation with Larky where for a long time we did not have access to information and tools, and people weren't diving deep into NFL game stuff. But we're at a point now where everyone kind of has this shit, and people are expecting you to give me a little bit more, man. I don't want a lot of targets in a bad offense. I would rather have the guy that's going to get 125 of them, but the offense is efficient. They've shown a history and a propensity to get multiple players involved. I know he's a primary target earner in that offense. Give me those targets over the Daniel Jones, the Bryce Youngs, the Mac Jones, New England Patriot wide receiver led offense. So just talk about where we are in today's game. Like, no one gives a shit about an 18-year-old breakout in college anymore, Scott. Nobody, the NFL doesn't care. 24-year-old running back, sign me up with the top 50 pick. Come in, get loaded up for your first 3-4 years in the NFL. We don't care how old you are, when you broke out, how tall you are, how much you weigh. If you can play, somebody's going to find a role for you. And the good offenses, they get those players involved. So just talk about the need, or at least the responsibility that we have to provide another layer outside of, they're just going to draft Nabers, no doubt about it. He's going to score more than DK Metcalf and Cooper Kupp and DJ Moore and Stephon Diggs. Like, it just seems wild to me.
Yeah, I think, and it's going to change some of the ways that we deliver content during the season too, because these things they're fluid. They're week to week. A lot of the things that you would say you're using from a data perspective last year, when do you start saying, okay, maybe I'm going to have to start changing what I'm thinking? Is it 2 weeks in, 4 weeks in, 6 weeks in? When is it enough time to start making those bets? Hell, you were talking Trinity last year. I think Trinity came out maybe like, the actual tool was maybe like week 5, week 6 last year, but you were talking about it on YouTube like 2-3 weeks in. Cause I remember you did those first couple videos before the tool was actually live. Right. And you were able even to see like, okay, these things are a little different already within the first couple weeks than what we had previously thought. And I remember that. I'll never forget the Adam Thielen video. Right? You were calling Adam Thielen like, yeah, you know what? Maybe this can continue for a little bit. Now, it didn't continue past like week 5 of the season. But the point was you were able to spot that almost in real time and really kind of dissect through why it might have made sense. But I also think, and this is something that comes from a underdog thing that I've learned this year, and it applies to even lineup leagues, because sometimes people ignore underdog content because they think, oh, it's best ball. It's not dynasty. It's not really going to help me. But one of the team building things is, I'll give you this example, right? So you have, let's say you're stuck. And when I say stuck, meaning most of your dynasty league, and let's assume it's a lineup league. I know you play mostly best ball, but let's just envision a world where Ray's still running a lineup league. I know you got a couple of them hanging around there, okay? Start 11. So you're looking for, maybe a flex or two that you would like to plug in your lineup based on some of the stuff you've cracked with Trinity. You have a couple receivers that you're sitting there going, all right, I'm drafting this guy, wide receiver 55 in Underdog, meaning like he's probably expected to have a role, right? He's probably expected to hit my lineup a decent number of times, but he's on my dynasty roster. And when I what happens when you put Jacoby Myers or Tyler Lockett on the trade block? How about Gus Edwards? You put him on the trade block, and it's immediately and fairly. The price is basically, is there anybody else that needs those guys? But what also is built in to that motivation of whether somebody would buy one of those players for the sharp dynasty gamer, not somebody that's like, oh, I like Tyler Lockett, I'll buy him. But here would be the question: if you have Adam Thielen on a dynasty roster, that's the best example. It's a start 11 lineup league. You have Adam Thielen. Mm-hmm. Ray, is he doing any good if he's your wide receiver 8?
No.
If push comes to shove, who are you throwing in the lineup? Are you throwing in T. Higgins over him? You throwing in Curtis Samuel week 1 over him? You know what I mean? And so the theory becomes, all right, if you have a guy like Adam Thielen on your dynasty team, you're not selling him. You're not even getting a third, right?
No.
The next best thing you can do is make sure that for the first probably 2 weeks of the season, he's in your lineup. You can't trade him for anything. It doesn't matter if he goes out and is a top 24 receiver for the first 2 weeks. At best, someone might give you a 26th third. You know what I mean? So the next best thing you can do for your team is go, okay, I have Adam Thielen, but he's just chilling on my bench. When am I ever going to start him? He's the 4th guy off my bench. And most people would go, I got him as some depth, right? Just in case I ever need to put him in there. But hell, when are you ever going to need him? And if you're going to need him, it's probably going to be, I don't know, week 9, 10, 11. Is he even still going to be kicking by week 11? So it's looking at your rosters that way. And I'm speaking more from a redraft or a dynasty perspective, but team building truly is looking at the season not as a 17-week season, but is like, what is the purpose for this player on my team? And sometimes it is just their insurance. I hope I never have to cash in that claim, but if I do, fine. But if it's a player like a Gus Edwards or an Adam Thielen, where the trade value is so far gone relative to what they could give you, the next best thing you can do is make sure that you're actually taking advantage of the short window that they may have.
The opportunity to score to capture those points, right?
Correct.
You want to make sure that you're capturing those points.
Correct. And that's the same when you're talking redraft, where these players are only 1-year bets, but more important in Dynasty, because talking about Garrett Wilson and Drake London, like, you probably don't want a roster of Garrett Wilson and Drake London and all. You don't want a roster where you've paid the peak price in like a startup draft for all of those type of bets, where if London, if Wilson, if those guys just are good but not great, they're naturally just going to fall back. Now, they're not going to fall back outside of that. They're just as good as every other receiver.
Right.
But their window of ever ascending into, damn, Garrett Wilson and Drake London, they're right there with Amon-Ra St. Brown. Like, that window is over. It'll never come back, because the community will never put them there, no matter how good they are going forward. I mean, look at DJ Moore right now. Look at the season he just had. But it happened in year 6, not quick enough, Ray. So,
yeah,
I mean, I'm not even arguing with this analysis, but DJ Moore historically he was Drake London and Garrett Wilson before those guys, right? He had all the metrics, and you're just going like, shitty situation. I waited his entire rookie contract and his 5th-year option and his extension. Finally, he delivers a top 10 season last year. And then immediately this year, fade him.
Nobody
he can't be that good, because now there's other players on his team.
He might not even survive the season on the Bears. Rome Odunze is going to push him out of town, some people say.
Right. And had he had that top 10 season in year 3, he would have bumped all the way. He would have been wide receiver 2 in Dynasty, Oh, damn. Look what he just did with Cam Newton. Wait until he gets a good quarterback.
That's how long he's been there, is he was playing with Cam Newton. That's how long. You know what I mean?
Him and McCaffrey and Cam together. And now it's like, those guys have had second careers where they're still studs. But that's a great example of like what would happen to Drake London and Garrett Wilson. There would just become fatigue on them, but it wouldn't change what they are. They would probably stay in that. They're going to be a wide receiver 2 every year. And you know what? They may run into a top 10 season in 3 years when everything comes together. But the point is, we would bucket them very quickly into that DJ Moore mold. He's good, but I just can't trust it. Terry McLaurin's the same thing, but he never got the DJ Moore situation, right? Like, he's one of the failed ones. Maybe he wasn't quite as good, but he never landed in that. But where has he always been? I mean, how many years in a row has Terry McLaurin been wide receiver 30, right? Wide receiver 24, like 5 straight years?
Since he came in the league. But he's the best. He's a top 5 receiver in the league. Everybody says it. Everybody says he's a top 5 guy, just needs a situation change. So what I'm going to ask you is this then. It's easy to buy into Puka Nacua after he's done it. Amon-Ra St. Brown after you've seen it. After you've seen these players be good, it's easy to say, okay, now you have my permission to go buy, right? We see Drake London, let's say it starts off very well. First couple of weeks of the season, you're like, oh shit, like it's happening. He's going to achieve it. Trinity it's all going to come together, and I see it by week 1, week 2. You've got my permission to buy. Peak value, whatever that may cost. What happened to the days of making those bets with all the information that we have today? Why not, Scott? Because let's just, for the sake of this conversation, let's just stick with the first 10 receivers, okay? I really don't care what order. It really does not matter. Inside of that top 10, you probably have an A.J. Brown, a Tyreek Hill, players that are on the downside of their career or not early on in their career, outside of like Marv and Jefferson and Chase. Why are people so afraid to make a bet to say that I do think based on X, Y, and Z, it's going to be Jackson Smith and Jigba. It's going to be Rashee Rice. I'm going to make the bet to buy, not sell Zay Flowers or Jaden Reed or Christian Watson or whomever, George Pickens, whomever because here, can we agree that somebody potentially, maybe it's just one of those guys, Scott, maybe it's 2, but somebody's probably going to push a range at the end of this year where you're like, ooh, shit, man, I'm glad I held on to a little bit of that Rashee Rice, or glad I didn't liquidate all those Zay Flowers. somebody's probably going to at least get enough volume and opportunity to move himself up into a range, Nico Collins or a Tank Dell. Why is it so difficult to just commit and say, based on this offense and this situation and this quarterback, while he may fall into this range, this one is different? I'm telling you, fantasy football consumer, drafter, people that listen to our work, shout out to everybody out there, make the bet, buy in the Nico Collins, rock with Jaden Reed. Why is it so difficult for people to sort of get to that point to where you could say, like, they're not, because I could tell you this, they're not all the same. They're not all the same. Not you, but they're not all the same. All those situations are not the same. The offenses aren't the same. The quarterbacks, they're not the same. And if you can spot, isn't that part of the game that we enjoy, is being able to pick and have some fucking nuts and be like, that's the guy that I'm rocking with, and here's why. Not haphazardly, not because he runs the smoothest routes, but here's some data and some reasoning why this is a play or a situation or an offense you should 1,000% be buying into and not afraid of. Because here's the reality, Scott. None of us, no matter what tool, what war, what this, what Trinity, none of us have any influence in the outcome. Nobody. You do all the work we want. We cannot influence the outcome, but we've got the information that tells us this is probably a good bet to make. Like, here it is. Why is it so difficult?
I think we have to put it in, and I'm always going to use, context has to come into this, but you mentioned some names. You invoked a couple names. I want to throw out a couple names, and I want to give people, I'm just throw this out to the crowd and respond in the crowd if you would take these outcomes for these players. You mentioned a couple that just trigger a lot of people. Zay Flowers, JSN. Someone even says in the chat, John says, you'll summon Shane if you mention JSN. Like that's one of those that
is that
you
the
bring
genie?
Up JSN. And, well, there's just people that are still convinced that JSN is one of the greatest receiver prospects and everything was just against him last year, and you just wait. Now, you mentioned Zay Flowers, you mentioned Jaden Reed, you mentioned JSN. You threw out a couple other names. You said Nico Collins. Brandon Ayuk's another one. Brandon Ayuk, Nico Collins last year. How good were they, Ray? Just if I had to say grade them from a F to a B, how good would you say they were? F to an A, how good were they?
They
Start with Nico.
Solid. I give Nico B+.
Okay. And then you talk about Brandon Ayuk.
He's right there with him. B+.
Okay. Yeah, Nico was wide receiver 7 last year. Ayuk was, I believe, wide receiver 15, something like that. And both of them rose to that very tip top of that dynasty tier where you're like, they're not quite in the Drake London, Garrett Wilson, because they don't have the 22, 23-year-old profile. They don't have the recency bias of being first-round picks just a year or two ago. But they were right there at that top, wide receiver 13, 14, 15. Now, how much, if I just gave you those two players right now, how much would you be willing to bet that those guys can exceed what they did last year? Just, they take it to another level. 1 to 10. The scale 1 to 10. If you just had to bet, they're going to exceed what they did, which means Ayuk's going from 1,300 to 1,400 yards. Nico's going from whatever he had.
Better in the coin flip.
He's going up to
better in the coin flip. Little more in the coin flip. 60%.
Okay. And I would say that for them to exceed that, and I mean, Ayuk go 100 for 1,510.
Yes.
Like, that is extremely hard to do. Very hard to do. Almost everything has to go right, including the player has to be damn good. And in these cases, we're not debating if the player is damn good, right? We're probably debating, all right, how much of the pie is Kittle going to get, and Debo, and McCaffrey, and is Purdy going to be even better than he's been in the past? Like, all those things come to play. Same with Nico. They got Schultz, they got Diggs, they got Dell, they got Mixon. Like, is it possible? But all of those are kind of like circumstantial things that are really outside of the player's control. But I just want to paint the picture of that's probably not the bet I'm going to place. If I have $100 and I got to bet on one player to just outpace what his expectation is, that is a much harder bet than saying Zay Flowers is going to finish wide receiver 15. JSN is going to finish top 20. Like, I think people need to appreciate how much easier it is to go from where, I mean, what is JSN on Underdog right now? It's like wide receiver 45, 46, something like that. I mean, to me, that is a fantastic bet. And I'm not even a huge JSN fan, but that seems like a fantastic bet that I think people may have blind spots on, right? Compared to Zay Flowers, who, you know, you've done enough Underdog drafts. Zay Flowers is going like wide receiver 20 to 25, you know? Like they're different bets, you know what I mean? So I think we just have to appreciate how easy it is for these receivers that we know are good. It doesn't take much to go from wide receiver 40 to wide receiver 20. It's very hard to go from wide receiver 15 to wide receiver 5. That's very difficult. So I don't know. I didn't really answer your question, but I just want to put that in perspective that all these receivers are the same. To get to that, okay, the guy was wide receiver 12. That's not that difficult. To go Ayuk's just going to finish top 5, top 6, that's very difficult. You know, he's competing with factors that are going to be hard for him himself or his situation to overcome. So I just want to throw that out there. Just think of receivers in that lens, though.
Well, and here's the counter to that is I think most of the times and most of the conversation that we have and most people have is about player ascending, but for that ascension to take place, that means somebody else is falling, right? And I think when you really start to look at the players that are being drafted right now in those ranges, you've got more people telling stories how Justin Jefferson is not going to finish as a top 3 wide receiver with those quarterbacks, how A.J. Brown isn't the wide receiver that you want because Jalen Hurts stinks, how people aren't really bought into Puka Nacua, how people don't trust Aaron Rodgers, Marvin Harrison Jr. is still a rookie. That's 5. That's 5 of the top 9 receivers right there, where there are narratives and stories around reasons why they are not going to finish within the ranges that they are. So when you talk about Nico moving up, we normally just think about it as all 11 players that are ahead of Nico Collins stay exactly where they're at. And nobody from that top section is going to move down, where if there's an upward trend, there's a downward slope somewhere else. It's not just them having to crack into this spot in this range where those players aren't potentially being drafted higher than where they're going to finish. Again, my question back to you is, sure, if you don't have the information to tell you that this is a good bet to make, you're looking at it right now, Scott, that Bobby Slowick is going to throw to this spot X number of times. This is what they do. And there goes the receiver that plays that role. It's not a blind bet. It's not a blind bet. It's funny that the thing that I continue to see float around in the space is the best predictor of fantasy success in the future is what they scored in the past. Well, if it was that simple, then the game would be solved. If we just say they scored X last year, therefore that's what it's going to be. But we know that's not true. We know that there is context and layers to that. Well, I'd venture to say, Scott, do people truly understand how difficult it is and how rare it is for I don't care what sport you're talking about, for a coach to change their identity? For a caller of plays or a manager of roster or an issue with timeouts, Mike McCarthy, for them to change the thing that they have done to get them to where they're at. That doesn't just happen. Bobby Slowick isn't just going to go from running 11 personnel to dumbing it down, and now we're only going to play 2 receivers and pound the shit out of the ball all game. He's going to do the thing that has worked, the thing that their quarterback enjoys doing, that they've found success. So the bet is not blind. There's 3 players that are going to be on the field. Here's where C.J. Stroud has historically thrown the ball. Here's where the receivers line up. Is it going to play out the same way? I'm not saying it is, but I bet you Christian Kirk doesn't line up outside, Scott. I will make that bet right now that Christian Kirk is going to play in the slot. I don't say what you want about Gabe Davis and his ability to be the X or the 1 or the 2. I bet you Christian Kirk plays his ass right inside. I bet you that. And I'll put a lot of money on that's where he's going to be because that's what he's done in the past. That's where Peterson has lined them up. That's where he's played. So as I look at some of these situations, there are good bets to make. There are bets that are plus EV, that are priced wrong in the market, that there's an inefficiency based on price to where that bet is a better bet than another bet, if that makes sense.
It does. It does. I think what you're talking about can be exploited a little bit more because we had a long conversation. I can't even remember when this was. It might have been Monday, honestly, about the Titans. We were talking through the Titans and this Brian Callahan versus Will Levis debate. And you were literally sitting there just grinding through some data, and you were like, I was asking you, how were the receivers being used in Cincinnati versus what the receivers and what Will Levis was doing in the past. And we kind of arrived at a conclusion that what Will Levis seemed to do best and the most is the opposite of what Brian Callahan has known his entire life. So not that I'm not high on what the offense could be, but what do you hear out there in the fantasy space? A lot of people, they're high on the Titans now. Why? Because they're going to throw it a lot. They're going to throw it more. That's the narrative. Brian Callahan passed it a lot with Joe Burrow, and he passed it a lot this way. And now he's just going to do all of that with Will Levis. And then you look a little bit deeper, and you were like, yeah, what he was doing with Burrow is not what Will Levis does good. So what's going to give? Something's going to have to give. That's where looking into the actual team situation and going, what did I ask you, Ray? If one person is going to win out in terms of their way or the highway, is it going to be Will Levis or Brian Callahan?
It's Brian Callahan.
Right. Because he's probably sitting here thinking, this is my one shot. And he already has, and this is right to the dynasty idea of there's a built-in excuse. He has the built-in excuse that goes, you gave me this guy. I didn't want this guy. I was told I need to make this guy work. So there's also a world where this pass-happy offense doesn't work. It's not working early. It's, oil and water between what Callahan wants to do and what Levis wants to do. And sure, they may appear to want to throw it more, but it's very inefficient and it's not working. You have veteran receivers that are going nowhere but over the hill. You know what I mean? And so there's a world where you look at that and you go, it's not working, but ultimately the coach is not going to be the one that goes, you know what? We're going to just do it this guy's way. It's going to be the other way around.
Do you want those guys, Scott? Do you want those guys? Like, real talk, man. Like, do you want the high volume, let's say, projected bad efficiency offenses? The Giants' number one receiver. You want D-Hop and Ridley? You want D-Hop and Ridley? Like, do you, or are you a little more just like, I don't know how heavy and how much I want to be invested in those situations? Like, how much Bryce, how much Deontay, you know what I mean?
I think with the Titans guys, they're priced at a spot, same with Deontay, to where you're willing to mix them in. But I don't think I'm willing to buy that the offense is just going to go to this. It's going to flip the script, you know what I mean, and do a 180. And it's all of a sudden the most pass-heavy offense in the league. And, I've backed off the Titans, if that answers your question, for that reason. And I think from a dynasty perspective, you hit on something really interesting earlier, right? You said for Brandon Ayuk or Nico Collins to take even a step up. Where do you think Ayuk is right now in dynasty value, dynasty ranks? KTC wide receiver what?
15.
All right, you nailed it. 100% nailed it. What about Nico?
14 or 16.
17. 17. And I think he's moved down a couple spots for some reason over the last month. But yeah, 15 and 17. There's a world. If I told you right now to tell me which order, if you had to place your chips, order the 4 of how these players will finish this year from a production standpoint. Garrett Wilson, Drake London, Brandon Ayuk, Nico Collins.
And just, we're assuming Brandon Ayuk is on the 49ers, right?
Nothing changed. He shows up. He goes like, the only way I'm making anything is if I just go do what I did last year. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Yes.
How
nothing
they finish,
changes. And yes.
I would put Ayuk at 1.
Okay. By the way, for everybody, Ayuk is the 4th of the 4 getting drafted on Underdog right now.
Wilson at
good.
2.
Okay.
Wilson at 2. Nico London.
Okay. Would you say it's also fair to say that if you had 10 bets to make, you probably wouldn't go 0 on any of the 4?
No. I'm getting 2 of each off top. I'm getting two of each for sure.
That's what I'm getting at. Let's say it's Ayuk and Nico, and London and Wilson just kind of end up doing what they did last year. Maybe they're better than previous years, but Wilson's targets go down. They're a little higher quality. London's volume goes up, but it doesn't really bust out from an efficiency perspective. Both of those guys are wide receiver 18 and 20, and Nico and Ayuk both crack the top 12. Okay. Dynasty. Then where do they show up next February? This is where you got to add in how much of the hopium will still be left over with Wilson and London versus, you get where I'm going here? Like,
yeah,
Nico could go wide receiver 7, and next year, people will go, man, give me that Garrett Wilson still. He's younger. What else is he? Younger. Nothing else, just younger. Because the quarterback situation, probably if it doesn't work for London and Rodgers or for London and Wilson, there's got to be whether it's going to be better than next year. You're like, do I got to wait another year? Like
exactly.
But I also think there will still be built in, man, Ayuk's going to be 27, going on 28. Nico's a 3rd rounder that didn't do anything until year 3. Like, they're all going to be in. So from a dynasty asset standpoint, if you told me I prefer London and Wilson, and I'll pay a little bit more, it's for that in this scenario, next spring, they're all in the same bucket. You can't tear off a one to the other. And Ayuk and Nico will get the respect of, okay, they're equal to those two, but they're not clearly better. So I think that's where these bets kind of come into play. And that's where dynasty is not a solved game.
Right.
Because nobody's able to work through. I mean, think about that scenario we just worked through with 4 players. You could do that with every pocket of players at every position. You never go through all of these scenarios, but that's where dynasty is never solved. That is the one area where if you're a good forecaster and ability to kind of read the market pulse on these players, you can always kind of construct your rosters to where you don't have a lot of risk on guys like Wilson and Drake London.
Well, let's do this game real quick. What happens if said player achieves, let's just say, best case scenario outcome, right? Because they're already in a range now to where if they just do what they've always done, they'll stay exactly where they are. They'll move down a little bit. But I'm just going to invoke some names and tell me how high, if this player has let's not go ridiculous here. What was a Nico Collins like season this year? They have they show an ability to be the number 1. They are a weekly starter. Let's just go Nico Collins type season, DJ Moore type season. And these are players who are expected to be very good, so I'm not reaching too far down. How far does George Pickens move up from where he currently is right now? And I'm just looking at Underdog ADP. I know he's in that wide receiver like 25, 26, 27 range. He goes out there and drops 1,308. Where's he at next year?
I think he probably settles right into the range where these guys are right now that we're talking about, right in that wide receiver 13 to 20 range. He definitely moves up, but I think he stays in that. I think he stays in that like top of the tier that I'm not willing to pay elite prices to get. You know what I mean? I'm not willing to pay 2 firsts to get George Pickens. I clearly know he's at the top of that tier, but no, he can't get any higher than that. In my opinion.
I bet you he's higher than Jalen Waddle. He's sitting at 12. And I'll just tell you this, it's how he does it. It's how, if it happens, it's how he's going to do it. And people will be in. Let me give you a couple of other names. and we're going to talk about one here in a second. Tank Dell. He goes out there. He is better than Nico. He proves to be the number one target. Has a Nico-like season. Tank Dell. How high does he go? Keep trade cut wide receiver 20 right now. Does he get inside of the Waddle Olave range and think Tyreek Hill's probably going to fall? He's 10, so no. Tyreek is probably out.
No.
Okay.
I think he basically flip-flops with Nico. He goes up 5 spots and Nico falls 5 to 10 spots.
Well, then we're at a very interesting crossroads then. We're at a very interesting spot. Because if you don't believe that Tank Dell or George Pickens have any shot, then I'm not even going to ask you about Zay Flowers. I'm not going to ask about Higgins, JSN, and we're about to talk about Addison. So now you're in the range with a bunch of other players that closely resemble the player that you talked about to start, DJ Moore. Well, these players who will have done it, but too late. Now you're in the DK Metcalf, Michael Pittman, Devontae Smith, Brandon Ayuk. You're in the same cluster. So what I'm saying is something inside of 15 and above is going to change. Because something is. We're going through. I don't think they can move there. But then that would just mean that just stays where it is. And I don't believe that's going to happen. When you look inside of that range, somebody's falling out. And there's somebody below that's going to be moving up. And there's somebody that probably is in danger of moving up if everything that we're seeing on the stream is true. Jordan Addison looks like he's potentially in some trouble, Scott. Not normally do we get breaking news on the show, but it looks like Jordan Addison was, is this arrested for suspicion of driving under the influence in L.A.? Again, just reporting what I'm seeing on social media right now, but there's some breaking news. Viking star receiver Jordan Addison was arrested on suspicion of drunk driving after being caught asleep at the wheel near LAX. This is the second offseason in a row he has had some legal troubles, one Jordan Addison, or at least been involved. Does this change anything with Addison, where he's going? What happens with this historically, Scott? I don't know if anything was, I don't know what's going to happen. Probably not much of anything right now. It's just unfortunate that he had a teammate that just unfortunately and tragically passed away in vehicle accident, and then this happens mere days later. What do you think about this situation?
I didn't even connect those two, but yeah, that is a bad look when you have a teammate killed because of a drunk driver, and then you get arrested for a DUI a week later. That's very bad look. Now, here's the interesting thing, Ray. I was talking with our boy Cody. I don't know if Cody's in the chat right now, but he's been working on his projections. And this is one of the most interesting teams because, have you built any teams on Underdog where you get some Green Bay Packers and then you're going, man, I'm going to get some late Vikings. And then you're like, wait, man, there ain't any late
Ty
Vikings.
Chandler's all that's there for me. Just
you're going, I got to – have you done it, Ray? You've reached on Ty Chandler a little bit just to get that correlation with some Packers that you – because there is nobody else. And the only other option is like, man, Hawkinson always goes right around his ADP, and I still just – maybe I got to take some more Hawkinson, just – because truly, this is one of the teams where we're going through this team. They don't even have – I put out that thread over the weekend to, name a receiver outside the top 130 that could hit a lineup this year in Underdog. There were some wild names mentioned. I mean, there were 40, 50 names that I'm going – some people did not get the exercise. They're going, Troy Franklin, come on, dude. These guys are getting drafted in every draft, right?
Yes.
But there were some names in there that were – that's like wide receiver 200. You know what I mean? But you know what I never saw? A Viking. I think I saw one Brandon Powell, but there really isn't anybody else on the team that you're like, has got to do something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But then, you're trying to reconcile this. Okay. The Kevin O'Connell system historically is not going to run no plays. It may not be Kirk Cousins high, but it's not going to be 0. And, I was talking to Cody, and I'm just like, if you're starting projections with the Vikings, you just got to give Jefferson 35% off the rip. Whatever the pie is, you just have to start with a third of the offense is him. But then that still leaves targets somewhere else. And I don't know. I think this is going to lead to probably some Addison. Is he going to get suspended? All that kind of stuff. But yeah, I'm curious, is there somebody on the Vikings that we're just not talking about that, that's what it makes me think with Addison. I think Addison is what he is. He already was not a popular player. So,
and see, for me, I'm committed to this year. There's none for me. I don't believe in the quarterback enough. I don't believe in what they have at the quarterback position enough to where, especially like where I've got valuable roster spots. Like, I'm not fooling with it. It's Jefferson, it's Addison, it's Hawkinson. I don't believe that anybody else who would be targeted would do enough to where it would even warrant taking that player. I don't believe in enough. I don't believe in the QB situation enough in Minnesota without having seen anything other than what they've had before in Sam Darnold, and we know how that story ends, and a quarterback who has limited experience throwing the football. I'm good on that offense, man. It's Jefferson. The issue with him, somebody said he was asleep at the wheel, so to be dismissed, just a bad look. I mean, what happens legally? Probably nothing is going to happen right now. Probably. He'll show up to training camp and practice and be on the field. I mean, there's still no word on Rashee Rice. But quickly, Scott, I just want to do a quick game with you, and it's yes or no. And it has everything to do with cost, opportunity, quality of target. I just want some names. I'm going to mention some names, and you're either in or out, yes or no. Devonte Adams, ADP of 18 right now in Las Vegas. Are you in on Adams this season in that situation at that cost?
I would say no.
And not are you drafting him for variance and all this? Are you? We
both know it. We both know it more often than not. I'm willing to take a guy below him ahead of him for that reason. Give me Nico, give me Ayuk, give me Waddle. Like, I've mixed in many of those where I go, And, part of this is the underdog theory is different than just are you in on the player, because it's one of those teams. You got to be committed to going Raiders Saints stack if you're going to do that, and it's not for everybody. But yes,
just think about where Adams is going. Okay.
Nope.
Mike Evans at his age, ADP of 23.5. Mike Evans. Baker Mayfield, new OC. He's already not living off of. It's not like he's a walking 100 target, 100 reception guy a season. Where you at with Mike?
I think it's fair to say that for all of these second-year receivers that we're saying they're all the same, but one of them's going to bust through. For one of these 31-plus-year-old receivers, right, one of them's going to fall off the cliff.
It's going to fall off.
And you're going to be glad that you just had a guy that has an upward-moving career versus Mike Evans or Keenan Allen or Cooper Kupp or Devonte Adams or Stephon Diggs. All those guys are top 30 receivers right now, top 35. So, yes, I would say I'll take some Evans, but same thing as Adams. But I think he's not as good as Adams. Let's put it that way.
Malik Nabers, where he's going off the board, 26, top of the third round. Malik Nabers in New York. Is that bet going to pay off for folks? Not the whole. Just now, if you had to say, is this a good spot to be?
No, the math doesn't work. It's the reason I mix in some Neighbors is probably just some pure bias. It's some helmet scouting, right? The last three rookie receivers that just blew the league away were all from LSU. They were all top 10 picks. So there's a world where you go, oh man, you should have just bought into that narrative, because he's going to have the opportunity. But for him to be you've gone through the data. For him to be a top 12 receiver, he just needs to be like, holy shit, he's better than everybody in the league. You know what I mean? Like, he's just that good. Not a good bet.
The last one, because I don't want to get down too far, because once we get down to Rashee Rice, you're like, sure, I'll take him at cost. It doesn't matter. Cooper Kupp, who was going much earlier in the process, much earlier when we started to do this back in February. But Cooper Kupp right here, wide receiver 21, ADP of 28, sandwiching between DK Metcalf, DJ Moore. A lot of people, I expected more people to be in on Cooper Kupp based on the fact that they weren't all the way in on Puka Nacua, still a late round guy. I just don't know. Kupp was hurt. Now he's healthy. but I'm seeing a lot of people say he just might be cooked a little bit. Where are you at with Kupp coming off the board right here in the third round, ADP of 28? Does that pay off? Does that bet pay off? Do you like that price?
I like it better than the Adams price, just because I trust the offense, trust the quarterback. But there's a little bit of a house of cards with that team where, I would be curious. Now, you can't say, oh, well, what if he gets injured or, blah, 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 what something happens. You know what I mean? But, yeah, I more in on it than the Devonte Adams price, let's say.
Here's a very interesting one for all the marbles, and this is where we'll stop with the player in or out. Same team, back to back. You've got to make a choice: Cooper Kupp or Kyren Williams. Cooper Kupp or and take whatever you want into consideration, because if you're roster constructing, he's not your wide receiver one. Kyren Williams could be your RB1, depending on how you ran that. But just for cost and what you think they may actually produce this year, who's the better bet, Cooper Kupp or Kyren? And it's interesting, they are literally back-to-back underdog ADP.
Probably Kupp, just the way that I'm building the teams. Probably Kupp.
All right. Let's go to chat real quick before we get out of here. Let's see. We've got Kyren easily. I'm also in on Adams. No Canales. I don't know what that is. Evans got a better team in QB than Adams. So Mike Evans. Tay Adams disrespect is crazy. And that's the thing. And I think so many people, I love having these comments, and he put an LOL there. What's up? What's up, Tarek? These used to bother me because I'd be like, I'm not disrespecting Adams. The thing is, it really has little to do with Devonte Adams and more to do with Aiden O'Connell, that offense, and Gardner Minshew. It's a lot to do. If you're not watching the receiver show on Netflix, Scott, like you really see how dependent they are on quarterback. You could be the sexiest route runner there is. If you've got a trash can with arms at quarterback, it doesn't matter. All those targets, they're for naught. All those air yards are for naught. I need you to catch the ball. It is truly hand in glove fit. When we're looking at the receiver position, if you are not paying attention and if you are not in tune with what the quarterback does, what that offense does well, it's a blind spot. You are going into the battle with half the information about your opponent. Sure, Malik Nabers could be as dominant of a route runner, command all those targets, but if Jones can't get it to him, if the offensive line can't protect long enough for him to get it out, if he's got a fear of pushing the ball downfield, throwing over the middle, hitting certain routes, if he is not comfortable doing those things, you're going to get a guy that's targeted a whole bunch and produces like Drake London that gives you 1,100 yards. And at the end of the day, you're thinking, this was supposed to work. 27% target share. This was supposed to work. Why did he only finish as wide receiver 14? I'm done. Just one of those things where I think moving forward, for me, when we get to that range of player, not the elite guys, but when we're talking through the Smitties and the DKs and the Kupps and the Moores and the Diggs and the Dells and the the Higgins and the Coopers and the Kirks, I am going to factor in those offensive situations. I like that stuff. It's a part of my process. It just is. I'm not saying it's the end all be all, but you better well believe I'm not looking at Miami's wide receiver 3 or 4 thinking that they're going to do anything for my roster. As much as I like Malik Washington or Odell Beckham or Taj Washington, they're not going to do a damn thing absent injury to both Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. And even if that happens, it's probably a rotation. There are certain situations that I am going to make a positive, affirmative bet on, and there's some where I'm staying the hell away, Scott.
Well, that's why it's hard. Just back to Adams real quick. It's hard for me to build a team around. I'm committing to Adams, which means I'm going to probably correlate around Adams to some degree, right? And I think there is a world where there's just a lot of things going against him. Like the only thing putting him where he is he's a historically Hall of Fame level receiver. But outside of that, you're looking here going, okay, Ray, are they going to have a good quarterback? Yes or no? Probably a fair bet to say no. Is he going to have the same quarterback every week? Fair to say, probably not. Ray, are they going to be a good team? fair to say. I mean, and it's not even our opinions. Go look at the Vegas odds. They're not projected to be a good team, right? Is this a guy that you can see the world where end of the year, he's not super excited to be on the Raiders for the rest of his career. He's going, okay, where can I go for one more year to try to win a ring? Like,
yes,
that's where, okay, do I think Devonte Adams is going to be a top 24 receiver and he's going to give me some weeks? Yeah, because he's good. But when you're talking about building a team around him and correlating around, that Tay Adams in week 17, you know what I mean? That's where I think you can use that information to just say, I'm not super excited for him to be able to get to that finish line, which should impact his ADP. Like if you're sitting here scared about your first or second round pick being available at the end of the year and moving upward in his career, I think it's probably fair to say maybe you don't want to build a ton of teams around that. Interesting, because I haven't really thought through every situation like that. Interesting.
And think about this, man. And we're going to end on this one. And this just highlights, Scott, the obvious. The things we all know. Everybody knows that a target from Joe Burrow was better than a target from Will Levis. That a target from Patrick Mahomes is better than a target from Bryce Young. You look at Devonte Adams, 17 games played last year, Scott. The only other time he did that was in 2022 with the Raiders. Surprise, surprise. 17 games played despite as banged up as he was. 175 targets last year, Scott. 175, 180 the year before that, man. 180 targets. And just think, in those 180 targets, like with a better quarterback or at least better situation, he finishes wide receiver 5, 20 points a game. Last year on those 175 targets, wide receiver 15, Scott. 103 receptions, 1,100 yards, 8 touchdowns. Gave you what? On 175 targets, man. When he was playing with Aaron Rodgers, and again, we're talking Hall of Fame quarterback, but a much better quarterback than what he's had, 160 targets, wide receiver 2. 148, wide receiver 1, 26 points a game. 127 targets, Scott, 12 games. Points per game, 18 points a game. Wide receiver 6. So it's like, yeah, I want the volume, but I want the volume in a good offense. I want if it's BK and I can have it my way, I want the volume in a good offense. 175 in a Carolina Bryce Young led offense, a Will Levis Titan led offense, a Gardner Minshew Aiden O'Connell led offense. Maybe I'll just take the 110 that I'm going to get from Brock Purdy, Kyle Shanahan, and Brandon Ayuk, man.
Yeah.
I want the good offense, man. I want the good offense.
I didn't realize that's got to be on the lower end of catch rates for Adams. I didn't realize his targets were that high last year relative to the catches that he had. Yeah, that's crazy.
5. And he finished barely giving you those 15 points a game. And a lot of that was because he was force-fed down the end of the stretch by Antonio Pierce when he took over, and they were like, you're just going to throw it to Devonte Adams. So, as we go into training camp, I am going to wrap this up, and Stanley, as always, is going to send a super chat. So, Rashee Rice, Christian Watson. Just that same sort of spirit of what we were talking about. We're not going to, I'd probably bet on Rice as well. Rice for me, Stanley, Rice for me. But as we go into the training camp season, Scott, what I'm going to be paying attention to is what those reports say about who's playing with what offense, what they're doing, what those things look like. I'm not going to buy into the actual preseason game hype that seemed to put us in a Pittsburgh Steelers trap last year, getting excited about those Kenny Pickett-led Steelers and how good they would be. But I'm just very curious to see who's out there in practice in 2 wide receiver sets, 3 wide receiver sets, how different the offenses look for people who have been in Carolina training camps in the past with Frank Wright opposed to how it looks with Dave Canales. What are some of the things that are happening? But I'll just say this, and I'll be very honest with you. I'm probably not making wholesale roster changes in Dynasty off of anything that really happens in training camp. It starts week 1. I'm paying attention. I'm filing it away. I'm consuming it, and I'm properly placing it in its right bucket. But I can't see myself making a bunch of wholesale changes based off of training camp information.
So let me ask you this. I want to end it on this question. when it comes to the rookie receivers and the non-obvious ones. How much grace, given how fast receivers move today, right? Like there's not a lot of grace for receivers. There's not many receivers you go, oh, year 3, he'll finally settle into his role. How quickly will you move? And maybe there's some bias in certain players in certain situations. How quickly will you move on how you would tier guys like Jalen McMillan versus Roman Wilson versus Luke McCaffrey versus Javon Baker? Because there's going to be worlds where Roman Wilson went a round higher than Jalen McMillan in every draft, right? But then it could be flipped in training camp where Jalen McMillan's running in 3 receiver sets with the ones and Roman Wilson's behind Van Jefferson and Calvin Austin. You know what I mean? And it's how quickly will you move with the non-insulated players? Now, if you're telling me it's Ricky Pearsall, well, of course he's not going to run with the ones day one. You know what I mean?
Right.
But I'm talking about the non-obvious ones where there's hopium, but now that the hopium is starting to get poured out of the bottle, you got to decide you want to clean it up or you want to let it continue to pour. Like, how are you going to decipher through those ones? Because that feels like this year I bought into more of those receivers simply for the ADV. And It's easy to go ADV. But in the next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, we're going to start seeing some of that ADV actually become exposed.
Yes.
To where that 3rd round Javon Baker may be going down the road of take a 3rd for him now because there is no hopium. That the dude's not even going to play this year. So is that a dynasty asset you want to hold or you want to re-roll within 2-3 weeks? How are you going to play those? Because I think
let me just say this. If you've got an opportunity to re-roll any of those guys, I think it's a blessing because they haven't done shit to even be in a position to get anything of value for them in the first place. So if you want to just liquidate, if somebody's willing to give you something for them, then great. But probably the way that would play out is you won't be able to. You won't. If it's looking like they're not going to be on the field, you probably won't. And what I would do is that the averages they'll get on the field at some point. And once they do, Scott, I will trade them at that point. The moment they show signs of or a flash of the hopium bean coming back, I'll move off of them. But the likelihood is you're probably not going to get much for those guys. So if you can re-roll any of those guys in the summertime, hell yeah. If I can just get out and get my 3rd round pick, 2nd, whatever it may be, if I have that option available to me, sure. But if it's looking like they may not be on the field or it's looking like what happens, Scott, when this report comes out? Tell me what happens in the fantasy space when the first couple of reports out of Cincinnati is that starting offense is Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Yoshi Voss in the slot. And Burton's running exclusively with the 2s and 3s. What happens then? What do people start to do now? Right? That's what I'm trying to capitalize on that fear and that panic if I'm able to do something,
Yeah, I think we got blinded by Puka, got blinded by Tank Dell, and I think we've gotten blinded by somebody like Dontavian Wicks, who started off exactly like some of these guys will, right? Just a no name on a team where there's a lot of other options. And then all of a sudden, a year later, you got people paying seconds plus for Dontavian Wicks. And that's where I think you don't have the discipline. You don't hold on to every day 3 receiver because there's Dontavian Wicks. I'm looking right now at my portfolio going, what do I do with these Jalen Hyatts? How about those? You know what I mean?
Yes.
Think about, I'll leave everybody with this. Think about what makes Dontavian Wicks what he is. His Trinity's good. Matt Harmon loves him. But think about the other things that have led to him being where he is right now. Why did he go from a no-name, picked up off waivers asset to a guy you can sell for a 2nd right now? And it's not as much Dontavian Wicks, the prospect. He didn't have a ton of buzz coming out. You know what I mean?
No.
It wasn't like this was a player everybody loved that just fell in the draft. But it was the right metrics telling the story. Now, we'll see if he can be a full-time player still. But I think it's also the way the situation is treated. We have a good offensive coordinator. We have a quarterback we like. And we have receivers that other people don't trust. So look for those when you're analyzing, should I dump this Jermaine Burton or not? Look for those type of factors that you may not see coming until a year later.
Scott, what do you think about that report that Kyle Pitts is going to play this dual tight end wide receiver role. You buying into that report? You excited about that?
Well, I was going to ask you about that because isn't he already doing that?
I thought so.
So how is that like? I've seen numerous threads on X today that like wheels up. You know what I mean? Like what? If anything, I've heard smart people say that the worst thing Kyle Pitts does is line up at receiver. What he should do is basically be a tight end. That I don't know.
I don't know, man.
My retort was Mike Gesicki does the same thing. Do you like him? He's a receiver. Man. He's not a tight end. They're going to play him at receiver. So
I just wanted to ask about that one, and we will wrap it up with that right there. We got a couple of people in the chat. Moggs, you ain't the only one. Moggs said he effed up and called Pickett a playmaker. Playmaker Pickett. That preseason had a lot of people fooled last year. Had a lot of people. None more so than my co-host Jay Rich. So make sure y'all wake up tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Me and Jay Rich on Wake Up. Scott, you got Destination Dynasty dropping tomorrow morning. If you guys missed any of the content that came out on Destination Devy over the weekend, Shane, phenomenal piece over the wide receivers that maybe you should buy, maybe you should get rid of. Check that out. And then Ty DeClaire and all the work that he's doing with the trade show on the channel. Make sure you check that out. Scott, we're off for 2 weeks. And pretty soon here, this show is going to transition away from Sunday nights and pivot to Wednesdays in season. So anything you want to say to the people before we take a 2-week break as we go on vacation and kind of wrap up our summertime plans before we get into the grind?
No, just dive a little bit deeper on every situation. Like one of the fun exercises, especially if you're kind of in downtime and you're kind of figuring out, does this news matter? Does this news not matter? Just pick a couple players a day. Think of a player. Just name a random player. How about, let's just say, I'm trying to find a good one that's interesting. T. Higgins. We'll say T. Higgins. Just think of why he's valued and where he is. Positive and negative. Just think of all the components that make up why he is what he is. Now, you can disagree what he is, but just think about all the factors that come into play. And how can some of those apply to other players? Because I think a lot of times we just gloss over a lot of those things. And then there's other situations that we dig into every single little detail. But I think that is the next edge in Dynasty, especially, is when all of the roster construction and war and understanding how all of these puzzle pieces fit together. Now you're kind of figure out, okay, how do I layer the puzzle pieces in whatever order? You know what I mean? That's where essentially picking players, and it's not picking players based on a model or on film like it was 5 years ago. It is picking players based on trends, based on bets that you want to make within teams, within situations. So think about that. Just go through a couple players a day, and as soon as you do a couple receivers, a couple quarterbacks, a couple running backs, you'll be going, okay, I kind of get the vibe as to how this guy could be the next T. Higgins. And even if you're wrong, at least you've gone down a path to where you say, that's where I'm going to place my chips based on this information. And it can be narrative, it can be situation, whatever it is. That's how you place your bets. Ray and I aren't always going to be right, but I think we're always going to bring to a man. You ask me, what do I think about this player? I'm going to dive into some of the things we've talked about, the ADV, the quarterback efficiency. You know what I mean? You're going to dive in. What role does the player have? How's he being used? Like that is going to implicate some of the bets that we make. So think about that. That's the new age of Dynasty, in my opinion.
Way to end it. See y'all in 2 weeks.